Chapter 40. From Cape Horne to the Amazon. How I got on the platform I have no idea. Perhaps the Canadian had carried me there. But I breathed, I inhaled the vivifying sea air. My two companions were getting drunk with the fresh particles. We had no need to restrain ourselves. We could draw this air freely into our lungs, and it was the breeze alone that filled us with this keen enjoyment. "Ah," said Conseil, "how delightful this oxygen is. Master need not fear to breathe it. There is enough for everybody." Ned Land did not speak, but he opened his jaws wide enough to frighten a shark. Our strength soon returned, and when I looked round me, I saw we were alone on the platform. The foreign seamen in the Nautilus were contented with the air that circulated in the interior. None of them had come to drink in the open air. The first words I spoke were words of gratitude and thankfulness to my two companions. Ned and Conseil had prolonged my life during the last hours of this long agony. All my gratitude could not repay such devotion. "My friends," said I, "we are bound one to the other forever, and I am under infinite obligations to you." "Which I shall take advantage of," exclaimed the Canadian. "What do you mean?" said Conseil. "I mean that I shall take you with me when I leave this infernal Nautilus." "Well," said Conseil, "after all this, are we going right?" "Yes," I replied, "for we are going the way of the sun, and here the sun is in the north." "No doubt," said Ned Land. "But it remains to be seen whether he will bring the ship into the Pacific or the Atlantic Ocean, that is, into frequented or into deserted seas." I could not answer that question, and I feared that Captain Nemo would rather take us to the vast ocean that touches the coasts of Asia and America at the same time. He would thus complete the tour round the submarine world and return to those waters in which the Nautilus could sail freely. We ought before long to settle this important point. The Nautilus went at a rapid pace. The polar circle was soon passed, and the course shaped for Cape Horne. We were off the American point, March 31st at 7 o'clock in the evening. Then all our past sufferings were forgotten. The remembrance of that imprisonment in the ice was effaced from our minds. We only thought of the future. Captain Nemo did not appear again, either in the drawing-room or on the platform. The point shown each day on the planisphere and marked by the lieutenant showed me the exact direction of the Nautilus. Now, on that evening, it was evident to my great satisfaction that we were going back to the north by the Atlantic. The next day, April the 1st, when the Nautilus ascended to the surface, some minutes before noon, we sighted land to the west. It was Terra del Fuego, which the first navigators named thus from seeing the quantity of smoke that rose from the natives' huts. The coast seemed low to me, but in the distance rose high mountains. I even thought I had a glimpse of Mount Sarmiento, that rises 2,070 yards above the level of the sea, with a very pointed summit, which, according as it is misty or clear, is a sign of fine or of wet weather. At this moment, the peak was clearly defined against the sky. The Nautilus, diving again under the water, followed the American coast. Captain Nemo did not show himself. Until the 3rd of April, we did not quit the shores of Patagonia, sometimes under the ocean, sometimes at the surface. The Nautilus passed beyond the large estuary formed by the mouth of the Plata and was, on the 4th of April, 56 miles off Uruguay. Its direction was northward and followed the long windings of the coast of South America. We had then made 16,000 leagues since our embarkation in the seas of Japan. About 11 o'clock in the morning, the Tropic of Capricorn was crossed on the 37th meridian, and we passed Cape Frio, standing out to sea. Captain Nemo, to Ned Land's great displeasure, did not like the neighborhood of the inhabited coasts of Brazil, for we went at a giddy speed. Not a fish, not a bird of the swiftest kind could follow us, and the natural curiosities of these seas escaped all observation. This speed was kept up for several days, and in the evening of the 9th of April we sighted the most easterly point of South America that forms Cape San Roque. But then the Nautilus swerved again and sought the lowest depths of a submarine valley which is between this cape and Sierra Leone off the African coast. This valley bifurcates to the parallel of the Antilles and terminates at the north by the enormous depression of 9,000 yards. In this place, the geological basin of the ocean forms as far as the Lesser Antilles, a cliff of 3.5 miles perpendicular in height, and at the parallel of the Cape Verde Islands, another wall, not less considerable, that encloses thus all the sunk continent of the Atlantic. The bottom of this immense valley is dotted with some mountains that give to these submarine places a picturesque aspect. I speak, moreover, from the manuscript charts that were in the library of the Nautilus, charts evidently due to Captain Nemo's hand and made after his personal observations. For 2 days, the desert and deep waters were visited by means of the inclined planes. The Nautilus was furnished with long diagonal broadsides which carried it to all elevations. But on the 11th of April, it rose suddenly, and land appeared at the mouth of the Amazon River, a vast estuary, the embouchure of which is so considerable that it freshens and purifies the sea water for the distance of several leagues. The equator was crossed. 20 miles to the west were the Guyans, a French territory on which we could have found an easy refuge, but a stiff breeze was blowing, and the furious waves would not have allowed a single boat to face them. Ned Land understood that, no doubt, for he spoke not a word about it. For my part, I made no allusion to his schemes of flight, for I would not urge him to make an attempt that must inevitably fail. I made the time pass pleasantly by interesting studies. During the days of April 11th and 12th, the Nautilus did not leave the surface of the sea, and the net brought in a marvelous haul of zoophytes, fish, and reptiles. I must not omit to mention one fish that Conseil will long remember, and with good reason. Our nets had hauled up a sort of very flat, ray fish, which, with the tail cut off, formed a perfect disc and weighed 20 ounces. It was white underneath, red above, with large round spots of dark blue encircled with black. Very glossy skin, terminating in a bilobed fin. Laid out on the platform, it struggled, tried to turn itself by convulsive movements, and made so many efforts that one last turn had nearly sent it into the sea. But Conseil, not wishing to let the fish go, rushed to it, and before I could prevent him, had seized it with both hands. In a moment, he was overthrown, his legs in the air, and half his body paralyzed, crying, "Oh, master, master, come to me!" It was the first time the poor boy had not spoken to me in the third person. The Canadian and I took him up and rubbed his contracted arms till he became sensible. The unfortunate Conseil had attacked a crabfish of the most dangerous kind, the cumana. This odd animal, in a medium conductor like water, strikes fish at several yards distance, so great is the power of its electric organ, the two principal surfaces of which do not measure less than 27 square feet. The next day, April the 12th, the Nautilus approached the Dutch coast near the mouth of the Maroni. There, several groups of sea cows herded together. They were manatees that, like the dugong and the starella, belong to the Sirenian order. These beautiful animals, peaceable and inoffensive, from 18 to 21 feet in length, weigh at least 1,600 weight. I told Ned Land and Conseil that provident nature had assigned an important role to these mammalia. Indeed, they, like the seals, are designed to graze on the submarine prairies and thus destroy the accumulation of weed that obstructs the tropical rivers. "And do you know," I added, "what has been the result since men have almost entirely annihilated this useful race? That the putrefied weeds have poisoned the air, and the poisoned air causes the yellow fever that desolates these beautiful countries. Enormous vegetations are multiplied under the torrid seas, and the evil is irresistibly developed from the mouth of the Rio de la Plata to Florida. If we are to believe Toussaint, this plague is nothing to what it would be if the seas were cleared of whales and seals. Then, infested with polyps, medusae, and cuttlefish, they would become immense centers of infection, since their waves would not possess these vast stomachs that God had charged to infest the surface of the seas. However, without disputing these theories, the crew of the Nautilus took possession of half a dozen manatees. They provisioned the larders with excellent flesh, superior to beef and veal. This sport was not interesting. The manatees allowed themselves to be hit without defending themselves. Several thousand pounds of meat were stored up on board to be dried. On this day, a successful haul of fish increased the stores of the Nautilus, so full of game were these seas. They were aconites. Their flattened discs were composed of transverse, movable, cartilaginous plates by which the animal was enabled to create a vacuum and so to adhere to any object like a cupping glass. The aconize effects their capture with extraordinary precision and certainty. This animal is, indeed, a living fish hook, which would make the fortune of an inexperienced fisherman. The crew of the Nautilus tied a ring to the tail of these fish, so large as not to encumber their movements, and to this ring a long cord lashed to the ship's side by the other end. The aconites, thrown into the sea, directly began their game and fixed themselves to the breastplate of some turtles. Their tenacity was such that they would be torn apart rather than let go their hold. The man hauled them on board, and with them the turtles, to which they adhered. This day's fishing brought to a close our stay on the shores of the Amazon, and by nightfall the Nautilus had regained the high seas.